Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 236. Well, it's a mess. Or is it? With the recent hubbub about Jujutsu Kaisen's most recent chapter, I took it upon myself to finally catch up to the manga. I was only at chapter 210, so it wasn't too hard, but when I finally caught up to the chapter, I finished reading and I said to myself, oh no, I knew immediately this was not going to sit well with Jujutsu Kaisen fans. Some, sure, but when you have the death of a major character, well, ain't nobody is going to be pleased. No matter how good or bad it is, because it's 2023, people. Our attention spans are completely shattered and gone, our expectations are constantly through the roof, and apparently nothing is more fun than complaining about stuff that truly does not matter. So let's complain about it and discuss what the hell is going on with Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 236. Is it really that bad? Or is this really just another overreaction? Hey, if you like Jujutsu Kaisen, Attack on Titan, One Piece, Demon Slayer, or Chainsaw Man, then you are in the right place. At 75k subs, we're doing a little something special. What is that, you may ask? Well, I ran out of ideas, so I'll be commissioning NSFW images of the female Titan's knees. So be sure to subscribe and drop a like on this video for some Nico kneecaps, you son of a bitch. So in chapter 236, this really is the big conclusion to the multi-chapter long fight between Gojo and Sukuna, who has now taken over Megumi's body. The last chapter, we saw Gojo standing tall, literally with Akutami telling us he won via the dialogue bubble of the last panel. However, the beginning of 236 is rather interesting. What we see is Gojo sitting down with all of the people who have passed away over the years, and in a way, it's actually nice to see this, but for now we see Gojo and Geto talking, chatting up like the good old times, which I want to stress that this moment is fleeting, but feel good. Then Geto asks Gojo, how was it like fighting the King of Curses? To which Gojo says, hard, and that he wasn't even trying his hardest against Gojo. But keep this in mind, this is the first point of contention. However, despite that, Gojo has been pushing his own limits, going at Sukuna as hard as he possibly can, though he laments that Sukuna wasn't able to give him his all. After this, we see the rookie, Haibara from Gojo's past arc, who was killed and caused Geto to crack, stating that Gojo lives for Jujutsu and he doesn't wield it to protect something, only to use it solely for the sake of self-satisfaction. This makes sense, because with most things in life, if you yourself cannot be satisfied, then you really aren't doing the job right, or you're doing a job you hate. Gojo, however, was different. He was invested in this job for himself, which was the right approach, as it allowed him to focus only on getting better, and through that, it would allow him to save more people, even though that was a secondary goal, so to speak. This is when we get into a really interesting piece of dialogue where Nanami once asked Mei where he should live, and she said, if you want to start anew, head north. If you want to return to your old self, go south. Nanami, well, he chose south because he is a backward-looking person by nature, and in his final moments, he bet on the future. My interpretation of what he means here is that Nanami chose to go south to let go of the future, focus on everything he's experienced thus far, and leave the rest to the future generations. In other words, this was Nanami telling us he's accepted his death, because dead people don't have a need for the future. They're always forever stuck in the past, as people who are, well, past, obviously cannot shoulder any more burdens or continue their job for others. They simply have to let it go and bet on the future because he won't be there to experience it. This was a great piece of writing to tell us that Nanami was at peace as he passed on. Gojo then calls to the Prez, Masamichi Yaga, shouting that he recalled Yaga stating that there is supposed to be no such thing as a sorcerer dying without regrets, a very good callback and backing up my interpretation of those events. Then we see Misato Kuroi and Riko Amanai in the Afterlife, and keep that in mind, as Gojo states he wishes this was all of his imagination. Back to the material world, we see Gojo lying in rubble with blood from his mouth and cold, absent eyes. Sukuna states that Mahoraga's adaptation process slowly started analyzing once it received an initial attack, and is complete after a certain amount of time. and that during that time, those additional attacks, well, the completion is sped up. Not only does it ensure that adaptation of the first Jujutsu, but the analysis doesn't stop and the adaptation continues. To break this down simply, which, make no mistake, this is really simple, the more damage this technique receives, the faster the process is sped up. Think of it like a character blocking in a fighting game and the other player hitting the blocked opponent to eventually break or shatter his guard, leaving an opening. It's similar to that, but the end result is that instead of breaking the guard, it completes the process faster. So instead of hitting the blocked character, Gojo should have never attacked during adaptation to begin with. He basically sealed his own fate by attacking, because what Sukuna wanted from Mahoraga was actually a desire to create this specified model that would counter Gojo's inviolability. Because of this, Sukuna couldn't defeat Gojo. He had to play the waiting game during their battle so that the model would show itself to him and he could learn to use it. This is why Sukuna seemed to lose in the last chapter. It wasn't until adaptation was actually completed that he found the perfect model, which he did not have during a majority of the fight. In other words, Sukuna was always going to win, unless Gojo could beat the clock and kill Sukuna before adaptation was started or would be completed. However, his chances still would have been slim because every attack, like I said, sped up the process anyways. So Gojo, really, 99% chance was bound to lose this battle the moment adaptation was activated. His second use of adaptation, however, would be a huge stepping stone in Sukuna winning because it was a slash that basically would cut the entire universe and its fabric. This meant that Gojo, no matter what, would be hit by his attack and he couldn't block it because Gojo exists within that universe, even with inviolability. Sukuna, bloodied up and clearly pushed to his limit, tells Gojo he was magnificent and shall never be forgotten. After this, Kashimo jumps into the fray, which I'm sure will be a banger fight in the next chapters. If it, happens like we think it will. Okay, so let's lay out all of our cards on the table and get down to what people really want to talk about. Gojo Satoru's death. Was it some grand ass pull, as people call it? Or was it actually not that bad, as there is a chainsaw revving outside of my house? Sorry about that. Well, in my opinion, I thought the death wasn't well executed. However, I don't think this somehow ruins Jujutsu Kaisen or even is as nearly as bad as people's first reaction to it is. I don't think it's a good thing either, but I also don't think it's great. And the reason why I don't think it's good is because Akutami, quote, off-screened his most popular character. What people seem to mean by this is that it feels like Chapter 236 was supposed to be the original 237, and we skipped an entire chapter in which Sukuna and Gojo would continue their fight, and it would lead to, instead of Akutami having Sukuna describing the final fight to us, would have actually been shown. In other words, this comes down to an execution problem, not a content problem. I don't think that anyone would really disagree that the mechanics behind Sukuna winning was perfectly fine. This is one of the good things about this. However, disappointing, yet as the description of the fight doesn't live to the full potential of actually showing it, It's JJK, I don't want a fight described to me. I want a fight shown to me with some description taking place outside the context of the battle. However, Akutami chose an artistic way of presenting the final fight to use outside of showing it, and I think it wasn't a good choice without first showing us that battle. The mechanics of adaptation completely make sense. Sukuna is basically telling us that adaptation is a model of which is superior to inviolability, using some kind of workaround to cancel it out and leave Gojo vulnerable. This to me is not some ass pull as people describe it, which I think that term in general is poorly defined as is, because many people's definition varies. It's like saying woke in 2023. Everyone has different interpretations of what that means. But there is always a truth to every negative criticism. A kernel of truth, and it's the same with people. Because, as content creators, we try to find the true meaning of what people feel to convey that to our viewers to give them more meaning on what they consume. Because of that, I think what people are truly angry about is the fact Gojo and Sukuna's final moments were cut and instead presented through dialogue after the fact. So, people wanting to simplify that are calling it an off-screen ass pull, which I don't think is a good description of what this is. Is this a shocking, poorly executed death? Absolutely, because I think we all knew Gojo was destined to die in this series, and there really isn't any denying that fact. Gojo overshadowed literally everyone in Jujutsu Kaisen, and I think this was the perfect moment to kill Gojo, which is by Sukuna's hands. A lot of people believe this was the wrong move because, well, who else is going to fight and take down Sukuna? But what I think people are missing is that this is the point. The point is now to see the characters still left standing and some more unintroduced ones climb the ranks, train, get more experienced, and more power. This is not a bad thing. This is perfectly fine and makes total sense. Name any good shonen, or even bad, and they all have this characteristic. Rising to the occasion to push the limits and stand up against the biggest bad you've ever seen. Thankfully, it makes sense with this, kind of, and I hate this term, power scaling in JJK. Because we've been shown that sorcerers have and will continue to raise the bar. We can clearly see that over generations, which of those generations are ever so slightly or gainfully more powerful than what came previously. Remember, sorcery existed before Gojo came around. People also have been stating that their mad Gojo has completed nothing, which I disagree with simply because he's trained a new generation of sorcerers to fight, and as well, he's saved a lot of people and done quite a bit to push forward the plot. I think most people are simply angry from the whiplash of Gojo's death that they're taking things they slightly disagree with or perceive to be wrong in the moment because of an emotional high and blowing it way out of proportion. Which brings us to another example of this moment, as there is a massive interpretation issue with how Gojo stated that Sukuna didn't give it his all. People took this as Sukuna wasn't even trying. However, this is dead wrong, as what the writing was trying to convey is that Sukuna wasn't basically being honest with his fight. And what I mean by that is, we can see clearly by Sukuna's last words that Sukuna literally gave Gojo everything he had and vice versa. But what Gojo wanted to do was drill into Sukuna that being the absolute strongest is also the loneliest, and being in that position, there is no one who can teach them love. Past context with writing suggests that Gojo wasn't saying Sukuna wasn't giving it his all power-wise, not only because they showed us that he literally was, but because of the context of what Gojo said here in conjunction with his past behavior and story arcs. Gojo describes that he was always truly lonely, no matter what, because he was the most powerful. After Geto died, he had nobody he could relate to. He had nobody who he could talk to, which is a mirror of what Geto went through before he went insane after Haibara's death. Both of them were alone in the moments they needed someone else the most, and Sukuna, as well, is a clear mirror of Geto and Gojo in that sense. Sukuna is the king of curses, and it's not like the king is a crown which can be held by two people, if you catch my drift. Gojo was saying here that Sukuna wasn't responding to what Gojo truly wanted to get through to him with this fight. He wasn't going all out, not literally, but emotionally, psychologically. He simply didn't understand that Sukuna is alone and that loneliness creates a situation in which love cannot be taught. Because without love, there is nothing but evil, and guess what? That is what Sukuna is. Evil. However, there are some interesting takeaways from Gojo's Afterlife scene that I think point towards hope for Gojo and even, hey, Nobara fans out there, I see you. I know you out there. In the Afterlife scene, Gojo sees all of his fallen comrades and friends from his past. Gojo, Nanami, Haibara, Yaga, Riko, Misato, he sees them all. Yet, where is Nobara? Many people are wondering why Nobara wasn't shown, and I think they're onto something here. Does this still mean that she's possibly dead forever? Of course. However, I don't think that the chances are zero-sum anymore. I think there is a chance we can see her again. As well, the dialogue of heading north or south is clearly a metaphor for going towards the light, which is the afterlife, represented in this metaphor by south and north, which represents the idea of continuing on in life, not leaving the future behind to reflect on the past, but instead continuing to grow and change, which is exactly what you do by living. You grow and change. So Gojo, responding to this idea, this metaphor, simply says, "I see." And this is pretty sus to me, only because we don't get the answer. Is Gojo southward bound, which is the afterlife, or headed north, which is life? Could he still be dead? Yeah. But I think it's naive to say that Gojo's story is yet to be exactly concluded. Not until we get that answer. The same with Nobara. I don't think the math says 0%, and that is enough for me, even if it is 0.2%. Despite that, I can understand people's anger towards this chapter. However, I personally am not exactly angry about this or flying off in rage over Gojo's death. It was going to happen anyways. And the more I think about this chapter, the more I actually understand where Akutami was coming from, even if he himself did admit that he rushed the pacing of this chapter, which I think he absolutely did. However, I once again want to make clear, people don't seem to be angry about the content of the chapters. They're more angry about the fact we didn't see all of this and feeling like it's a bait and switch to have 235 end with Gojo literally standing tall and Akutami telling us he won, only to have the next chapter having him lying in 2 pieces on the ground, presumably dead. This is not good execution or writing, and this should have been chapter 237, with 236 being that battle we didn't get to see. Akutami truly messed up here, and he did it only because he wanted to match up 236 with episode 9 of JJK Season 2's release. And let me tell you, that was a mistake. I personally do not get the fascination of rushing stuff like this in Japanese culture, particularly with manga and anime. Why rush to synergize with other events when you can instead take your time, not blow your load 4 seconds in and enjoy the ride, ever so slowly? This was definitely a euphemism for the sex. Getting even more attention and even more money. Makes no sense to me. But let me know your thoughts on Jujutsu Kaisen, Chapter 236, and Gojo's death. Was it horrible, or was it a good chapter? Also, comment below if you're dropping this series or will continue reading JJK. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to everyone who just subscribed to the channel. My video on the most recent episode of JJK has already over 20,000 views and gained me nearly 200 subs. So if you're new here, welcome. I hope you enjoy the channel. Also, check the pinned comment for a list of all of my playlists so you can get caught up on the content. If you want to financially support the channel, then consider becoming a patron to gain access to my massive One Piece arc reviews. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.